Welcome, learners, to another deep dive. Today, we're taking you behind the scenes of a really fascinating historical inquiry. We're looking at the actual documents agencies use when they have to respond to major investigations. Our mission today is to unpack a specific declassified memo. We want to focus on the nuggets of information it reveals, about a key historical period and just the types of records these intelligence agencies keep. We're sifting through excerpts from a memo dated January 25th, 1978. It's from H. Clark Shawar, who was chief of the Central Cover Staff, and it's addressed to the Office of Security. Basically, this document is a direct response to a request from the House Select Committee on Assassinations. You probably know it as the HSCA.
Right. And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is that we're getting this direct glimpse into the internal mechanics of an intelligence agency branch.
Right.
This memo from the Central Cover Staff, the CCS, it isn't just some list. It's really a window into how an organization like that processes and responds to official congressional inquiries. It lists specific people, specific entities, and it details the kind of information they had, the volume of documents, how many pages or files, and the exact timeframes covered. It really helps us understand the painstaking, sometimes administrative process behind historical review and, how those seemingly mundane details can actually reveal some pretty significant operational insights.
Okay, so let's unpack this memo then. The Central Cover Staff, or CCS, they were essentially the agency's keeper of secrets when it came to identities and operational fronts.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
So they held information on individuals and entities specifically requested by the HSCA. Now, given the sheer magnitude of these kinds of congressional requests, what would you say was the biggest challenge for a branch like the CCS in responding? I mean, what kind of internal processes would they have had to navigate just to pull this information together?
Well, that's a great question. You have to imagine trying to find a needle in a haystack. But the haystack is this meticulously organized, yet absolutely vast archive built over decades. So the challenge wasn't just locating the files, it was understanding their precise context for the committee. This memo highlights specific items the HSCA was interested in. And for each one, the CCS had to figure out what responsive documents existed, if any, but only within their very specific mandate, which was primarily about operational cover and identity management. It wasn't about general intelligence gathering or, say, all communications. It was a very precise, almost surgical kind of information retrieval.
That precision really seems to come through as we dive into the names. So first up, item 5, George de Mohrenschildt. The memo states there were 5 documents concerning him, and it specifically mentions 4 contact reports related to his, quote, commercial asset activities in Haiti. These documents date from a really tight window, April 25th to May 21st, 1963. Now, for a figure whose name often surfaces in the historical inquiries, especially around major events of that era, what does such a brief, specific period of documentation related to commercial asset activities suggest? I mean, about the agency's engagement. Does that confirm or maybe challenge common perceptions of his role?
Yeah, that's where it gets truly intriguing, isn't it? This isn't some long-term, extensive file. It's really just a snapshot. When we talk about commercial asset activities in this context, it often implies that de Mohrenschildt's business or commercial ventures were either being used somehow as a cover for intelligence operations, or perhaps he himself was providing some form of operational support, maybe even unknowingly, through his business dealings. The brevity of that window, just that 1 month in 63, might suggest a very specific, maybe short-term project, or perhaps just a period of heightened interest. It doesn't really scream sustained, deep relationship. It gives us a concrete example, though, of how the agency leveraged seemingly civilian activities for intelligence purposes. And that's a key operational nuance that often gets overlooked in those broader historical narratives.
Okay. So from a fleeting contact in Haiti, we shift to someone with a much longer, seemingly more integrated history with agency cover operations. Leo Chern, that's item 8. Here, the memo details 21 documents relating to him. They cover several time periods, from 1954 right up to 1977. And the striking detail is that these documents concern the, quote, establishment, maintenance, and use of cover provided by Chern from 54 to 65 for a NOC officer assigned to Paris. Now, for you listeners, NOC means non-official cover officer, so someone operating without any obvious government link, just blending into a civilian role.
Exactly. And what's particularly striking here is the depth and the duration of that relationship suggested. Chern wasn't just providing cover for maybe one officer briefly. The CCS actually maintained a separate file on the Research Institute of America, where Chern was the executive director.
Hmm.
And that file alone had approximately 100 documents, covering an even longer period from 1949 to 1964. And Chern's name apparently appears throughout that file.
Yeah, 100 documents.
Yeah. So this tells us about the sheer breadth of information collected, the interconnectedness, of individuals with organizations, and it really highlights the agency's reliance on external, seemingly independent entities to facilitate long-term, non-official cover for its operatives. It paints a picture of a much more extensive and embedded operational setup than just a simple one-off contact.
Okay, moving on. Next, item 17 focuses on William Harvey. The memo lists approximately 50 documents concerning him. The focus again was on the establishment, maintenance, and use of cover, but this time for him throughout his career as a staff employee with the agency, and that spanned from 1947 to 1967. So when we talk about cover for a staff employee, what exactly did that entail? Why would an intelligence agency dedicate, 50 documents just to that one aspect of one person's career?
It's important to understand that cover isn't just like a fake name. You should think of it more as the entire fabricated identity and backstory and operative uses to conceal their true affiliation and mission. Now, for a staff employee like Harvey, who was a pretty significant figure in early CIA operations, maintaining cover was absolutely paramount to his effectiveness and, frankly, his security. So these 50 documents, they would likely detail everything from his fabricated employment history, his financial arrangements, travel itineraries, maybe even the tiny little details of personal life that would make his cover story believable under scrutiny. The sheer volume indicates this meticulous, almost obsessive, attention to detail required to maintain operational secrecy for a high-level operative over a, two-decade career. So yeah, these aren't just names on a list. They're records about the intricate operational details of their intelligence work.
Right, the mechanics of it all. And it's not just about individuals, is it? The HSCA also asked about organizations and the broader scope of agency affiliations. The memo shows how the agency logged its engagement, or sometimes its disengagement, with groups like the International Rescue Committee, IRC, that's item 27. There were 12 documents from 62 to 76 addressing the agency's, quote, non-use of the IRC and also FOIA requests related to them. And then for Alexander Rourke, under the same item, the memo just explicitly states no record in CCS. What's the significance of that no record entry for someone like Rourke, especially when you contrast it with the meticulous documentation for others we've seen? It feels like an absence can be just as telling as a presence sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. That no record is quite significant. It immediately tells us that Rourke, even though he might have been of interest to the HSCA for whatever reason, was not a figure for whom the Central Cover staff managed any operational cover, period. Now, that doesn't mean he had no intelligence connections whatsoever, but it specifically rules out that type of relationship handled by this particular branch, the CCS. And for the IRC, the documents explicitly stating non-use is also very precise, isn't it? It shows the CCS maintained records even on entities they specifically chose not to engage with for cover purposes. Perhaps, to track potential vulnerabilities or maybe just to manage public perception, especially given that mention of FOIA requests.
Interesting. Okay, so we've looked at individuals and organizations with these varied levels of engagement. What about the top brass? The memo also sheds some light on records kept for the agency's most senior officials. Specifically, Richard Helms, James Angleton, and Raymond Roca, they're all under item 20. For each of them, there are approximately 25 documents covering pretty extensive periods of their careers. The memo focuses on things like TDY travel orders, cover documentation, and clearance verifications. And for Angleton, it even includes details about his retirement processing. This is during his time as a staff employee from 1947 to 1974. How unusual is it for a branch like CCS to keep records on something that seems almost mundane, like retirement processing? What does that tell us about the granularity of agency documentation, especially for its most sensitive personnel?
Well, it's extremely telling, actually. TDY, temporary duty, travel orders, those are essentially official travel assignments. Covered documentation, as we've discussed, details their fabricated identities. Clearance verifications ensure they have the necessary security permissions for their, highly sensitive work. But the inclusion of retirement processing for someone like Angleton really emphasizes the agency's, let's say, cradle-to-grave approach to managing its most valuable and potentially vulnerable assets. Even seemingly mundane administrative details were meticulously documented within the CCS remit, precisely because their official roles, even going into retirement, needed to align perfectly with their deep cover histories built over decades.
I see.
This level of detail just ensures consistency and security over a long time. But what's also fascinating here is that while the CCS had these specific operational records for Helms, Angleton, and Roca, The memo also explicitly states for item 30 that there was no record in CCS of correspondence or other communications involving these three individuals.
Mm.
So this really highlights the specificity of the CCS's mandate again. They maintained operational records related only to cover, but not necessarily all general communications or correspondence. It's like a highly specialized library, maybe, where they only collect books on cover operations,
Yeah.
but not the personal diaries or the broader letters of the authors.
That's a helpful analogy. It makes sense. Finally, let's turn to item 36. This one also features two entities. First, Southern Research Corporation again, another no record in CCS entry. But then there's Wackenhut Corporation, and this one's a big one. It lists 100 to 150 documents covering the period from 1963 to 1977, and these primarily concern contacts with Wackenhut officials. Now, 100 to 150 documents for a private security firm. That suggests a pretty substantial and sustained interaction, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
What might this extensive contact record imply about the agency's relationship with private entities like Wackenhut during this, pretty politically sensitive era?
Yeah, this detail about Wackenhut Corporation's extensive contact records spanning over a decade, it's particularly intriguing. For a private security firm to have such a substantial file in the CCS, specifically, it suggests a deeper, maybe more sustained liaison than might be typical. It could potentially hint at the agency utilizing external private entities for maybe outsourced operational capacity, perhaps for things like domestic surveillance, logistics, or even intelligence sharing, sort of pushing the boundaries of traditional government operations. It definitely raises questions about the nature and the purpose of those contacts, especially given Wackenhut's own complex history. And it underscores this evolving landscape of intelligence gathering where private contractors became increasingly integrated into national security efforts during that period.
So, okay, stepping back, what does all this mean for you, our listener? This deep dive into just a single declassified memo really gives us a rare glimpse into the sheer volume and the intricate detail of records kept by intelligence agencies, especially concerning individuals and organizations that were of interest to major congressional investigations like the HSCA. From the nuances of cover details to travel orders and commercial assets, these documents provide such granular insights into operational histories. It almost makes you wonder if every single piece of paper, every phone call was tracked with this level of detail. It sounds like a bureaucratic marvel, or maybe a nightmare, depending on how you look at it.
It certainly highlights the meticulousness, doesn't it? This particular memo, remember, it's just a small piece of a much larger declassification effort, but it reveals the painstaking process of information retrieval required for a congressional committee and the very precise nature of the records that were, or importantly, were not held by a specific branch of the intelligence community. It really underscores that historical truth often lies buried in the diligent examination of these fragmented, highly specific documents, and that the absence of a record, like we saw with Rourke or Southern Research, can be just as telling as its presence.
Yeah, so for you, the learner, the key takeaway here is that even a seemingly dry administrative memo like this one can open up entire worlds of historical context. And it can raise really compelling questions about how information is collected, how it's stored, and how it's eventually retrieved or not retrieved.
Exactly. And beyond that, for anyone interested in how history actually gets written, this specific memo serves as a pretty stark reminder. Often, the most critical pieces of historical puzzle aren't the grand pronouncements or the smoking guns you might expect. They're the meticulous administrative details, just like the ones we've uncovered today from the CCS files. So, maybe consider this. How might the specific nature of records maintained by different intelligence branches, beyond just the central cover staff we looked at today, further alter or maybe deepen our understanding of historical events and the narratives that get built around them? It's clearly a vast, intricate web out there, and we've really just pulled on one very fascinating thread today.